Today, I am going to be talking about Chapter 3, titled Mental Events, from the book Everyday Consciousness and Primordial Awareness by Traleg Rinpoche. To start out with, he divides up the mind into two divisions. The principal mind, which we've already talked about with the 8 consciousnesses, and then mental events, which we're going to talk about today. The principal mind with these 8 collections of consciousness include the 5 senses, sensory consciousnesses like the eyes. And these, you might say, gather data. They don't think, they just relay data to the mind consciousness, which is the 6th consciousness. And then the mind consciousness, all of these aren't singular. That's what we call collections of consciousness. So our eyes are constantly, if there's something to see, collecting data. And that our mind then constantly is having one thought after another, and getting input from our sense consciousnesses. So this too is a collection. And then from that, there is the klesha mind consciousness, and then the all-base consciousness, which is a storehouse. So this is the primary mind or principal mind. And we Buddhists use the idea of collections of consciousnesses to also help counter the idea of thinking that mind is a self. Trungpa Rinpoche talks about the mind getting confused and taking the mind as a self 2 ways. The mind, which is constantly thinking, constantly grasping at a self, begins to think that this is innate amongst myself and amongst everybody else. Everybody else is the same thing as me, that our mind is a separate unit. Sometimes it is thought that it's the body that is the self. Sometimes it's the mind. Depends on the person, depends on the time of day. Sometimes they think that it is a combination of both. But the idea is that it is singular, that the I is singular, and this term collection negates that singular I concept. The other is the completely imputed self. And this is a truly existent self, that mind is the self. And the Buddha said that no, mind is neither singular nor is it permanent. So a completely imputed self would have to be permanent, it would be self-existent, and so forth. So both of these ideas of self are contradicted. And then to go into mental events. So the principal mind has clarity. It can see, it cognizes, it understands, and it appears. Quote, whenever the actual clarity aspect becomes more intense, and when the particular details are also clearly perceived, this induces the process of mental events. So I went and did a little searching here about, well, exactly what does mental events mean? There were some things in this chapter that I felt I was having trouble understanding as well as I wanted to. If I'm going to be teaching it, I better understand it. And I'm thinking if I'm having a little trouble here, maybe the people that I'm teaching will also have some difficulty. So this is one quote that I found about mental events. They are defined as aspects of the mind that apprehend the quality of an object and have the ability to color the mind. And this comes from the abhidharma, which Trungpa Rinpoche mentions. These mental factors are categorized as formations concurrent with the mind. So I hope that helps you get a little more clarity about these formations. So strong thoughts mean many mental events, weak thoughts, fewer mental events. There are 5 categories of mental events, and I'm going to go through what is in the book, and then I'm going to go to this document that I put together and many of you have on your computer. So the categories are, first of all, the ever-present mental events. To describe that, we continuously experience mental events such as the sensation of our own happiness or suffering. The use of ever-present means that they are continuously active in the mind, and that various aspects of consciousness keep the whole mind moving and cause this uninterrupted appearance of sensations. And this is why they are called ever present. I want to point out the Tibetans have a number of different words or phrases that basically mean the same thing or very close. Then when you start translating these into English, you can get different English words for the same Tibetan word. Depends on the translator. So in this document that I put together here, this came from a book by Tai Situ Rinpoche. And here, instead of ever present, it's omnipresent. That's not too confusing. So now what they are here, I'm just going to go right down the list. Feeling, which is the second aggregate, or of the five skandhas or the five aggregates. It is the second skandha or the second aggregate. Already we got the same problem, same word in Tibetan, two different English words. Second is recognition, discrimination, distinguishing awareness. And this is the third aggregate or third skandha. Third of these five ever-present mental factors is intention, mental impulse, the idea that I will. And then the fourth is concentration, attention, mental application. This is focusing and grasping on an object of awareness. And then finally, contact, which the object connects with the mind, pleasure, painful, neutral. And this is the aggregate of feeling. I thought this would be good to kind of fill in the blanks here on these categories to give you a better idea of what is being talked about here. Now, number two is, quote, mental events with certainty over the object, end quote. These events do not appear the moment of consciousness appears. They only appear when the object is perceived clearly and with stability, usually within the context of the five senses, plus the mind consciousness. So there is some mental activity here. In, let's call it the handout, here is called the five determinative mental factors. I'll go through this a little more quickly. Resolution and aspiration is the first one. The second is interest, appreciation. Next is mindfulness, recollection, not forgetting, concentration, samadhi. And then the last is intelligence, wisdom. So these are mental events that are related to various sensory perceptions as we process them through the sixth consciousness. Number three is virtuous mental events. Your own positive attitudes together with the virtuous actions. That's what this entails here. And they are the activity of the sixth consciousness. The other seven consciousnesses aren't involved in this. Now, here on this handout, in a little different order on the handout that they are in Trungpa Rinpoche's book, down at the bottom of the first page, the 11 virtuous mental factors. Right off the bat, he says that the last two are not necessarily always virtuous. The first three are also known as the roots of virtue. So I'll go down this list: faith, confidence, respectful belief. This is a positive attitude toward virtue and objects worthy of respect. Then he talks about the three types of faith. Again, I've seen a lot of different words to describe these three types of faith, but here there is uncritical faith, which is just faith, he says here, with no apparent reason. It's faith combined with some interest. You might say this is the door we usually start with when we get involved with Buddhism. Then the second is longing faith, and this is where you've made another step and it's a little bit stronger. You see what the teachers are like. Maybe you've noticed a little difference in your own life, having practiced and studied. Here it says emotionally unstable mind. Yes, you realize your mind is unstable and emotional and so forth, but you realize that there are people, the teachers, that seem to have qualities that you would like to have. And so that's the level you are with this longing faith, kind of longing to be like the gurus. And then the third, conviction. This is when you actually have had experiences, and it's based on your own experiences and your own reasoning. And that is a very strong form of faith. The next is a sense of propriety, self-respect, that you have a conscience that you are, you might say, in touch with and follow, and it keeps you going in the right direction and avoiding negative actions. The next is considerateness, decency, and this keeps you from engaging again in negative behavior towards others. And he says it is the base of unspoiled moral discipline. Then suppleness, thorough training, flexibility. So having a very flexible mind and avoiding the mental and physical rigidity that we can sometimes have. The next is equanimity, clear-minded tranquility, then conscientiousness or carefulness, renunciation, detachment, non-hatred, imperturbability, non-bewilderment, non-ignorance, open-minded, and then non-violence, complete harmlessness, enthusiasm, and diligence. Of course, if you're enthusiastic and diligent about doing negative behavior, that's where it can be a problem. That's why it's not necessarily always a virtuous mental event. The next is the collection of mental afflictions. And these are mind's impure aspects. And these are going to become very familiar to you. The A here is the root afflictions, the constant and more intense afflictions. They're basically the 5 poisons with a few others added. The other type is, quote, secondary afflictions. These afflictions appear only occasionally. They're less intense. They are doubt and wrong view. To go over that again, the collection of mental afflictions, we've got the 5 poisons: anger, attachment, ignorance, pride, jealousy, and then we add to that doubt and wrong view. Let's see, in here, titled The 6 Non-Virtuous Mental Factors. And doubt here is described as being in 2 minds about reality that usually leads to negative actions. I remember Rinpoche once saying that doubt is an obstacle on the spiritual path, and it's an obstacle in your mundane life too. So it's just plain an obstacle. And wrong view, I think this is good to discuss this a little bit more. There are 5 types of wrong view. One is belief in a self that is permanent or non-existent. And this is different than questioning the Buddha's teachings on no self. It's this strong belief that there is a permanent self, or there is just plain non-existence, that emptiness means there's nothing. So it doesn't matter what I do. So denying karma is another one. Not understanding the value of the 3 jewels, and then closed-mindedness. And I have here my view, which is wrong, is the best. That's the idea of closed-mindedness. My way or the highway, I think, is a good American saying. And then wrong conduct. That is conduct that takes you away from liberation rather than towards it. Next comes the variable mental events. And sometimes they can lead to virtuous states, sometimes they can lead to negative states. That's why they're variable. And there is 5 groups here. They are based on which of the kleshas are influencing this mental event. He mentions there are 20 secondary non-virtuous mental factors, and that is sleep, and then regret, If we have regret, it can lead us into a positive direction, or it can lead us into a very unhappy, guilt-filled situation, and it prevents our mind from being at ease. Then general examination / course discernment. So depending upon the intention, intelligence, or whatever, this gives the mind something to search for and, you might say, grasp onto. It gives us a rough idea, but we don't know if it's going to be a good outcome or a bad outcome. So it's course discernment. The precise analysis, which is the last one, is depending again on intelligence or intention. This factor examines the object in detail. So it's like looking at an object or an event, a distance, and then the other is looking at it very closely, seeing all the details and maybe doing some analysis. The last is this list of 20 secondary non-virtuous mental factors. And this wraps it up, but these are interesting, so I thought I would go over them. And this brings it up to 51 when you get through the list. Wrath or hatred. This is strong anger, a malicious state of wishing harm to come to others. And this is derived from anger. So wrath, hatred is derived from anger. Vengeance, malice, resentment, that's the second mental event that's derived from anger. Rage, spite, outrage, that's the third mental event. And then finally, cruelty, vindictiveness, mercilessness. That one is devoid of compassion or kindness and just seeks to harm. But all of these are seeking to harm. And of course, the bizarre thing is that if you're harming anybody, you're really harming yourself when you're doing this, both in terms of the karma that you're creating and that your state of mind while you're in that state is a very miserable, suffering state of mind. So next comes mental events that are derived from anger and attachment. And this is envy or jealousy. And that's the only one that has both anger and attachment. The next one is 3 that are connected to attachment. The first is greed, avarice, miserliness. The second is vanity, self-satisfaction. He says being intoxicated with oneself. The third one is excitement, wildness, mental agitation. Next, there's a list here of mental events that are derived from ignorance. Concealment, hiding your negative qualities, dullness, muddle-headedness. I like that word. It's a word that I haven't heard for a long time, and I don't think I've ever used it. But anyway, this is caused by fogginess, which makes the mind dark, heavy, and so forth. Next is faithlessness. You just don't have any faith. You don't think there's anything out there worthy of having faith in, respecting. The next is laziness, being attached to temporary pleasure. I think as English-speaking or American-speaking people, you'll all appreciate this. The Tibetan word for lazy is lay low. So now you'll probably remember that one. The next is forgetfulness, and that keeps us from remembering the virtuous actions and to do them, among other things. Inattentiveness, lack of conscience, and that is the last one of these mental events derived from ignorance. Next are those that are derived from ignorance and attachment. Hypocrisy or pretension, which would be pretending we have qualities that we don't have. Dishonesty, smugness is the next one. Hiding our faults and not giving clear answer when asked. Next are those derived from attachment, anger, and ignorance. Shamelessness, consciously not avoiding negative behavior. Inconsiderateness is the next one. Being inconsiderate with others' practices, ingratitude, and so forth, that one. The 50th one is conscientiousness, carelessness. He says, quote, the 3 delusions plus laziness. And then finally, distraction and mental wandering. So now you have a much better idea of what these mental events are and what they entail. He brings up next in the text how these 51 mental formations or events are used in iconography. He mentioned Vajrayogini has a necklace of 51 skulls and 51 flowers, and the skulls represent the 51 mental events, and the flowers represent their purified form. So all the appearances of samsara, you might say, are held within these 51 mental events and our 8 collections of consciousness. It is the mind that creates karma, stores it. The positive karma influences one's development, and it conditions our mind and our motivation. Prangu Rinpoche feels that motivation is absolutely most important. I can tell you, I had an interview with Rinpoche one time, and it was prior to entering the 3-year retreat. And I asked him, am I ready for 3-year retreat? And he said, it all depends on your motivation. Our motivation is very, very important. When we meditate, we accumulate virtue. And in doing that, our future appearances will improve. And as a result, then gradually the impurity is given up, it's purified and becomes pure. So when this actually happens, the 8 consciousnesses are transformed into the 5 kinds of primordial awareness, and the impure transforms into the pure. He then goes on to explain why this can happen, which is really quite simple. Because there is not a truly existent out there, phenomenal world out there. It's a phenomenal world that is empty of inherent existence. It's a matter of causes and conditions. It's not solid, in other words. It's not like we confused beings think it is. These are appearances that are in our own mind. And when we take control of our mind, we develop the ability to see things in a pure way rather than an impure way. So the transformation is internal. When you reach that transformation of the 8 consciousnesses into the 5 wisdoms, it isn't that the world will change. People around you aren't going to say, oh, everything changed now because of you. It's going to look the same to them. And you will see things the way you used to and realize it's more like a dream, and you will see things the way they are, and you will be able to distinguish between the two. I'm kind of getting ahead here, but the metaphor that is frequently used is that the sun and the clouds obscure the sun. And when the clouds part, then the sun shines through. That's our Buddha nature, or our primordial awareness. But in fact, what is being talked about here is talked about from a more advanced level. It's not a matter of the clouds disappearing. It is the clouds transforming into the sun. And my favorite picture, and it shows these clouds of gas and dust, primordial gas and dust, and in them new stars are being born. In other words, the clouds of gas and dust are transformed into suns. You don't clear them away. Their nature is the sun, but they're confused, if that makes any sense. This is not what would I say, a traditional 2,000-year-old teaching from India. To go on from this, the shamatha meditation is extremely important, purifies, transforms, mind becomes more independent. It brings deep insight and understanding into the essence of our mind. Quote, when this naturally empty but clear essence of mind is realized, karmic imprints likewise cannot cause harm.